Hey everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman back with you for the 216th Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call. We're going on 5 years actually next month. We are going to have a really hardcore expedition into modern energy-based technology. We're going to revisit the nuclear issue as we did last week and with the great Joe Mangano and talk about issues of health monitoring around atomic reactors with Robert F. Kennedy at the Department of Health. We really need to explore his uncle, Ted Kennedy's idea of having a permanent monitoring program to check the health around nuclear plants, including, of course, two reactors at Diablo Canyon in California, which brings us to the second point, which is the lithium battery technology, which we saw explode and continue to burn at Morro Bay in California. I'm sorry, well, near Morro Bay, near the Diablo Nuke is a terrible fire with lithium going on, and of course we now have literally millions of electric cars driving around with lithium batteries, and they do present some technical, shall we say, technical challenges. So we're going to deal with that. We have some great experts. Brian Roeder is with us, and others. And then in the third segment, we again have some great experts. We're going to talk about the question of whether, and we're joined by Julie Levine, who's a great advocate on this, whether solar panels on your rooftops actually have health implications. This we need to deal with them. I mean, we're talking very positively about putting solar panels on millions and millions of rooftops all over the world. There are already 1.8 million in California. We don't want to jump ahead with this technology without having evaluated the possibility that there could be health implications. And I have a personal interest, and I have a house in LA, and I actually signed a contract to put solar panels on my roof. And then, thanks to Gavin Newsom, the company went bankrupt. So I didn't do it. And I want to make sure that before I go ahead and put these solar panels on my roof, there are no health impacts that would make the whole technology a negative. We don't want that. So we're going to deal with three technologies today. Some of it may be eye-rolling in parts in terms of the technical stuff, but we'll do our best to keep it very, very simple and understandable. And if it's not, raise your hand, please, and we will slow down and clarify. But
Lago, this is Tatanka. Were you talking about the lithium explosion at Moss Landing?
Moss Landing. I keep getting Moss
Okay.
Landing and Morro Bay in
Okay.
my adult 80-year-old brain.
Thank you.
It is Moss Landing, and you're near there, Tatanka, right?
Yeah, wherever I move, there seems to be something about to happen.
Well,
Yeah.
that's America in the 2020s is
Yeah.
wherever you go, there's something. I do want, before we jump into these technical issues, it is very rare that I read a news story that causes me to lose sleep. But last night, before I went to bed, I made the mistake of reading a New York Times piece on the situation in our borders. And that we're all aware of the horrible treatment being dealt with immigrants, which is absolutely outrageous. My grandparents were immigrants, for God's sakes. I don't know who on this call does not have immigrant ancestors, but this whole BS about the bad hombres coming in. There is one bad hombre immigrant that we're dealing with, who I don't have to name, and he could be shipped out as far as I'm concerned. But nonetheless, what's happening at our borders now is that not only, and it's bad enough, of course, dealing with people coming here for asylum and economic well-being and so on, but they're now targeting tourists. And just as a business, the United States has a very huge tourist industry, many, many billions of dollars. And, it's wonderful to be a citizen of a country that's a tourist destination. And this article basically outlined that the border authorities are destroying people coming in as tourists. And there's one story that, I don't know what people are thinking here. They arrested a young German woman who was a tourist. with a passport, and they put her in 9 days of solitary confinement. I mean, this woman's in her 20s. She just came to see, the Grand Canyon, the Statue of Liberty, all the things that we're so proud of as Americans. I mean, and then she went back to Germany. All that has to happen is she goes on German television and explains what happened. Nobody from Germany is going to come to the United States. Canadians have stopped coming here. People from Europe are not going to come to visit the land of Donald Trump. What are we thinking? Or are we thinking? It really disturbed me. I mean, obviously, as the grandson of immigrants, this whole nonsense on the immigration issue is a huge diversion as far as I'm concerned. But just to envision a young woman with a passport, with money, coming into the United States to be a tourist, and they throw in 9 days of solitary confinement. What has happened to us? And it really, really disturbed me to the point that I couldn't sleep. Rarely, rarely happens to me. But there you go. So we'll go into greater depth on that next week. And and there's other. We're also going to talk next week. I had a conversation before this call with the great Lee Felsenstein about the technology of gathering names and contacts at rallies. I mean, we are 100% sure that there will be millions of people at rallies in the United States this summer. And in history, in the past, our rallies have been basically photo ops. Everybody comes up. Think back to the million-person rally when Trump came in the first term. There were a million people there, and everybody was talking about how powerful we are. And then everybody went home, and that was it. We can't do that anymore. So we have to have, and everybody now coming to these rallies has cell phones, for better or worse, right? So what we need to do is have the technology now available so that when people come to mass rallies, they can go to a website and sign up with their emails and their phones if they want to do that, so they can be texted, and so that we can actually build a movement from these rallies, as opposed to having everybody come and have some great music and speeches and big hugs and go home. And so Lee Felsenstein, who was brought to us by Tatanka Bricca, is going to, we'll go into detail on that next week. We'll also ask the question, would various billionaires in our country have funded Adolf Hitler and built the death camps? I mean, that's what we're talking about here, and we got to deal with it really as a question and a discussion. Steve, our engineer is, as always, Steve Caruso with Mike Hirsch. Steve, you got a hand?
Yeah, the plane for special rendition to El Salvador was en route when a court ordered them to stop and turn around. Of course, the Trump administration ignored it. So is that the new death camp? I don't know. The other thing is the bloop. It's in the chat.org. THEBLOP is a list of all the protests, or some, but you'll have to contact the organizers to get specifics.
Okay, good. And then the question that we'll deal with next week, along with the other question that you just raised, do we have a court system? I mean, if the president of the United States ignores court orders, as Andrew Jackson did, by the way, his great hero, one of the worst human beings that ever lived, Andrew Jackson, he ignored a Supreme Court decision. It was in 1830. Well, actually, it was after him. It was actually Martin Van Buren who did the ignoring, but Jackson threw down the gauntlet. The Supreme Court of the United States, a decision written by John Marshall, the Chief Justice, who had been Chief Justice since Jefferson for more than 30 years, ruled that the Indian Removal Act was unconstitutional and that the Cherokee Nation could not be moved as Jackson wanted them moved. The Cherokee Nation applied for statehood. It was called one of the 5 civilized tribes. They had a newspaper, they had a constitution, they had lumber mills. I hate to say this, but the Cherokee Nation actually had slaves. But they applied for statehood, and they at the same time applied to not be forcibly removed. And Andrew Jackson said the famous quote is, "Well, the court has made its decision. Now let them enforce it." And he said he was going to move him anyway. It wound up being his successor, Martin Van Buren, who did the moving. But now, Donald Trump is basically saying to the court system, I don't have to follow what you say. So we'll deal with this next week. Do we have a court system? Because we're going to find out in this coming week a lot about what the balance of power is in this country. Okay. I see we're joined by the great Donna Gilmore. Donna, great to see you. One of the great experts on many, many things. Dave Saltman's with us. But we're going to go now to Joe Mangano. If you, Mike or Steve, could you put Joe on camera? I don't know if your camera's up, Joe, and if you had your hair done this morning. But last week we did a full hour on radiation and health and the possibility that, the insanity. The Trump administration wants to start testing nuclear weapons in the atmosphere, which we haven't done since 1963, for God's sakes. And we had a great discussion about that. And then today we want to segue that. We'll go for 40 minutes, and then we'll go to Brian and Sarah about Moss Landing. But we have, weirdly enough, I know this is something to say, but Robert F. Kennedy Jr., for what it's worth, is now in charge of the health department. And he wrote the introduction back when he was still Bobby Kennedy, wrote the introduction to my book, Solartopia. And he's very well aware of the nuclear issue. And his uncle, Senator Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts, who was in the Senate for a long, long time, advocated that there be a national epidemiological institute, essentially, because it would be an ongoing operation that would scientifically monitor health impacts of atomic radiation coming from nuclear power plants. There are 94 reactors operating in the United States. I think it's 60, 70 locations. Now, Joe Mangano, over the decades, we won't ask how long you've been doing it, Joe, but it has been the prime mover in conducting health monitoring around atomic reactors and in peaceful atoms in this country. So last week we discussed nuclear tests. Joe, let's start with this. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., if you were sitting down with him and said, look, I want you to monitor the health impacts around atomic power plants, how would you do it? What would you say to him about how it needs to be done?
Well, the first thing is that the monitoring should actually start in the past, because of the fact that in the entire atomic era, there has been exactly one federal study of cancer near nuclear plants in the U.S. And that was, as you mentioned, a study that Senator Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, asked the NIH, National Institute of Health, to do. They did the study. This was in the late 1980s. The National Cancer Institute did it. It was kind of a whitewash. I mean, there's gobs and gobs of data in it, but the conclusion was there is no link between living close to a nuclear plant and the risk of cancer. And since then, and that's the late 80s, this is now 35 plus years ago, there has been no further study from the federal government. Really, this is the reason why our group, RPHP, even came into existence. The studies just weren't being done.
RPHP, what does RPHP stand for?
It stands for Radiation and Public Health Project. We're at radiation.org if you want to know more about our work. But that was the reason we were founded, to kind of fill the void in knowing answers to the basic questions like what are cancer rates and cancer trends near nuclear plants. Now, we've published a number of journal articles and reports looking at this question. To do a full study of the United States from decades ago and up to now would be a staggering job to do, which would take a long time. It's very clear that it is needed. In fact, just recently, and I've posted this report on our website. So it's the top story on the homepage. That I took 16. I kind of copied the National Cancer Institute study of the late 80s, and I only took 16 of the oldest U.S. nuclear plants, those that opened from the years 1969 through 1975. And I looked at total cancer deaths for 3 periods. Now, by the way, can I share my screen?
Well, it's being shared. Steve
Yeah,
is doing a
yes.
job.
Short answer, yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
How
And
do I do
let me
it?
say, by the way, those of you here from the community around the lithium issue, you should get in touch with Joe, because Joe has mastered the art, the science of doing epidemiological studies around polluting facilities. And if there was ever a time to initiate a health study in an area, it's at Moss Landing right now.
Yeah.
I mean, Joe could give you the great guidance as to how to do exactly what needs to be done to find out if, in fact, this massive release of lithium has a health impact. Go
Um,
ahead, Joe.
Now I can either just tell you what I found,
No, go ahead. Tell us. Tell us
or share
quickly.
the screen. All right.
Both.
I took the CDC's mortality website. They have data on all deaths in the U.S. beginning 1968 up to 2020, for every county, every state, every cause of death, and age, and gender, and so on. And I took the home counties of these 16 old nuclear plants. These are the ones that have been running 50, 55 years and are applying to run 80 years. And I looked at their county's death rate versus the US death rate, which is what National Cancer Institute did for 3 different periods. One was the period around the time of startup, 1968 to 78. Number 2 was the early years of operation, the next 20 years. And number 3 were the later years of operation, from the late 90s to the year. And what I found was, and it's so much easier to see on a graph, but I'll if I can't screen share,
Go ahead. Just go ahead.
I'll try to explain. In the baseline period, the local cancer rates near the 16 plants was 3% below the U.S. In the early years of operation, it was. You've allowed me to. No,
There you
that's
go.
no. It's not on. It's not on there. Sorry. Only I can do it. Anyway, 3% below at baseline. The first 20 years of operation, the local rate was 0.8% below the U.S. It was basically equal to the U.S. And in the last 22 years, it was, excuse me, I did this wrong. It was 6% below to start. Then it moved to equal to the U.S. And then in the most recent period, it is 3% above the U.S. If you take the most recent 6 years, 2014 to 2020, it's now 6% higher. It's gone from 6% below the U.S. to 6% higher.
So
Doesn't
you're
sound like
saying
much. Doesn't
the count? It's a lot. It's a 12% jump.
you're
So you're
talking
saying
about
in the counties around atomic power reactors, the cancer rate has risen 12% relative to the United States cancer rate.
correct. And what this means in terms of actual lives, about 8,500 excess deaths. In other words, if that baseline period, 6% below the US, had continued ever since, 8,500 fewer people would have died of cancer in these 16 counties. And I did the same thing for all causes combined, cancer and other. And we found 19,500 excess. It was the same thing. It started below the US and now is above. This is just the beginning. This is just a kickoff, but it is something that if all cancers are seeing this shift from below the US to above, we're going to see it for particular cancers, whether it's thyroid cancer or breast cancer or colon or whatever. And for different age groups as well. Children, it would be a particular area of interest. So this is the kind of study that I would envision. I believe I have no idea how Bobby Kennedy and his staff would react to it, but we certainly have had no chance in the past. In fact, 2 years ago, one of our board members, Susan Shapiro, had an idea. She said, let's go talk to Bernie Sanders. So we did on Zoom. It was doing during the pandemic. We talked to one of his staff members and two people from the National Cancer Institute. They were very polite. And when we were done, we said, we would like Senator Sanders to be the Edward Kennedy of 2022. We would like to see him as the head of this commission to study. And they were very polite. They said, thank you. We'll let you know. And never heard from them again.
Well, the amazing thing,
we have nothing to lose.
right? The amazing thing in the bigger picture is that the United States of America introduced this technology, commercial atomic power plant. They put the first one just outside of Pittsburgh. So it was not far. And of course, the way America's gone, every nuclear plant is now near human beings. Even Diablo Canyon, which is out in the boonies, is still right up the street from Avila Beach. So they introduced this technology. They said, well, there's not going to be enough radiation to harm people. Therefore, we're not going to study whether nuclear plants harm anybody.
There's nothing in any regulation, Harvey, any federal, state, or local regulation that says to operate a nuclear plant, you have to track local rates of health. None.
Well, now the same is now true of lithium batteries. I mean, my friends in Western Mass, they tried to put in a big battery facility, and there was no mention of ongoing epidemiological monitoring. Far from it. So you, Joe Mangano, have had to raise the money, set up your own operation. You are not a government operation. And the industry, and believe me, I've heard this 1,000 times. The industry says there is no measurable health effect from the operation of a commercial nuclear power plant, but there's no study. There's no monitoring. There's no health data from the government to make a conclusion supported by data. Now, right? Is that correct?
No, absolutely. Yeah. I'd like to add one thing. I know there are probably people that want to weigh in on this, and that is.
Well, no, I want you to finish first. Let's have
this. I mean, I think the key here is there is lots of data available. The key is making sure the study is an independent study. Independent of what? Of governments and the industry. Right? In addition to us, there are several very solid academic-based. Tim Mousseau from the University of South Carolina, David Richardson, an epidemiologist from UCal Irvine, and Mike Ketterer from Northern Arizona, among them, who have published in this area. It can't work if put in the hands of the National Cancer Institute, or is highly unlikely to work. Maybe under Robert Kennedy, it would be different. No, it would have to be independent. And I think there's no better example of this was in 2009, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission proposed doing a study, which I'm sorry if I'm insulting anyone on the call who put time and effort into it. I was against it from the beginning. It was a complete conflict of interest. They're the regulator. They shouldn't be commissioning. In the end, after 7 years and $10 million, they canceled it before it even started. It has to be independent.
Well, yes, and then let's take it to the next level. So in 1979, March 28th, what's today? We're getting close to 17th. March 28th, 1979, there was a meltdown at 3 Mile Island. Now, the first thing the industry said was there's been no meltdown. They denied that there was a meltdown. And then, and there was actually no way to confirm. So it took them 9 years. They finally got a robot that didn't get, every robot they sent in got fried by the radiation. Finally, they got a robot in there. They took pictures, and well over half the fuel at 3 Mile Island, in fact, did melt. Then they said that not enough radiation has escaped from 3 Mile Island to harm anyone. But they had no idea how much radiation escaped because the monitors, especially the stack monitors, went off scale. And then they were saturated with liquid, so they didn't work. They didn't know where the radiation would have gone or who would have been affected by it. They have absolutely no scientific basis whatsoever for saying that no one was harmed by the radiation at 3 Mile Island. Then they didn't do a study. And they did have Columbia University go in and look at it. And Maureen Hatch was the head of it. I talked to her once, and they came to the conclusion that they had no conclusion. But if you looked at the data that they compiled, what do you say about the data from Three Mile Island, Joe Mangano?
Well, first of all, I just posted a link on the chat room here. I did an article for the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist 20 years ago about how corrupted the whole health study issue was after 3 Mile Island. There were articles published, Harvey, in the health literature. Most of them were about stress and psychological effects, all right?
Right.
And not about cancer. Now, the Hatch study, well, the Columbia team said there was really no link, even though the number of cancers within 10 miles of 3 Mile in the 5 years after the plant went from 1,700 to 2,800 new cases. And after about a year or two after she put out her study, a team from the University of North Carolina School of Public Health, led by Stephen Wing, the late Steve Wing, published several articles looking at the same data that Columbia had put out, concluding there was a link, there was an elevated
Right.
risk of cancer for all cancers, for lung cancer, for leukemia, and I think there was one more. And a fight broke out in the scientific journals. All right, Columbia called UNC all different names, and UNC said that integrity was important. So it was so terribly politically corrupted. You have to be very careful who is assigned to do these.
Right. So I did, what I did was I started getting phone calls because by 1979, we were pretty well known for fighting nuclear. And I got calls, and I actually persuaded Rolling Stone to send me to Central Pennsylvania. And in January of 1980, and I spent the worst week of my life interviewing people in their farmhouses, which Brian, you and all you people around, Moss Landing are going to have to do, and because there was no health researchers from the government were going around Central Pennsylvania interviewing people if they were harmed. So I did it, and it was horrible. I mean, people were showing me their scars, the teeth falling out, a metallic taste. The people at 3 Mile Island in the neighborhood, many of them reported during the accident a metallic taste in their mouth. And you know who else reported a metallic taste? The crew of the Enola Gay.
Oh, yeah.
The guys who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, as they were flying away, said they had a metallic taste from the bomb. So anyway, the local people, and it was all women, by the way, Jane Lee, Mary Osborne, I stayed at Jane Lee's house, and I woke up in the morning and looked out and saw the towers. I was within a mile of the nuke 9 months after. And they went into a place called Lower Swatara Township, a suburban neighborhood. And they went door to door, almost 600 houses, and took the survey and asked people about their health. And it was horrifying. Virtually every household had a health problem. It wasn't always cancer. Remember, of course, the cancer takes many years in many cases. And that was one of the fallacies of the Columbia study, was that they were too quick. I mean, if you're gonna see about cancer around a nuclear plant or at Moss Landing, you're gonna have to wait 10 years. You're gonna have to keep the data until these health impacts really take root. So it is an absolute disgrace and crime. And Jill Murphy Long is with us. And Jill, I'll call on you if you'll raise your hand. We'll get you unmuted. And also Carl Grossman. It's a disgrace that nobody from the government went in and conducted an epidemiological study around 3 Mile Island. How could they not? How can you not study it, for God's sakes? Not only did they not study it, but one real quick, Joe, the state of Pennsylvania, until the accident, was running a tumor registry. If you had a tumor in the hospital, they recorded it. After the accident, they stopped recording tumors. Can you believe that? I mean, Jesus.
And the governor fired the health commissioner. I'm forgetting
John McLeod.
Thank you, McLeod. Yeah, Gordon McLeod. Yeah, that's it.
Gordon
Yeah.
McLeod. Gordon
Yep.
McLeod.
Yep.
And he said, Gordon McLeod went on record as saying that there were, in fact,
Yes.
health impacts from the
Yes.
radiation at 3 Mile Island.
Yep.
And the other
The
thing about
government.
radiation, of course, it doesn't, the company came out in the middle of this and said, well, the radiation, and they have no scientific basis for saying this, by the way. The radiation is the equivalent of everybody in central Pennsylvania getting one chest x-ray. Well, first of all, it's complete nonsense. But the reality is that Alice Stewart in the 1950s,
Very good.
one of the few female medical doctors in England, was commissioned to do a study. They were noticing an epidemic of childhood leukemia, and she had no agenda whatsoever. She did a laundry list of things to check for with the pregnant mothers who had given birth to children who then wound up with childhood leukemia. And on the list, at random, I don't know, 20, 30 things on the list, was, were you x-rayed while you were pregnant? And it just leaped out that x-raying pregnant women while they were pregnant definitely led to a doubled childhood leukemia rate. And you know what they did? You know what the response was? They wanted to lynch her. They attacked Alice Stewart. They didn't say, like a sane group of people, well, we better stop x-raying pregnant women. That only took 30 years after they assaulted Alice Stewart year after year after year. Finally, in the 1980s, they said, well, maybe we should not x-ray pregnant women.
Ultrasound came around. That's
right. Ultrasound came around. So at 3 Mile Island, they never did. Well, they did the Columbia study, and then they ignored the obvious findings. And they Maureen Hatch ducked under a rock. All you had to do is look at the numbers that they came up with, but they didn't want to do that. So here we are now. It's in the mid-2000s. We have 93 reactors. We have 70 years of experience with this. The shipping port plant went online in 1957, and there was no ongoing monitoring put in place. Now, Bobby Kennedy knows about this. It was his uncle who was the loudest voice demanding a study. And Ted Kennedy was extremely powerful, and he couldn't get it done. So here we are, and now we have this catastrophe at Moss Landing. And who is there going to be a state or federal registry to track people? It has to start now. People have to be, people move. The names and their medical condition has to be recorded. But here we are, Joe Mangano. Carl Grossman is on with us, and Joe Long. Jill Long, you made a film. You want to tell us what you've done? Can we unmute Jill Long and see? We have 77 people with us, which is now what's his name's number at the Lakers?
Luka Doncic.
Yeah, there you go. Doncic, yeah. And they're losing. Well, they won yesterday. Anyway,
Yeah.
Jill Long, do you want to talk about your work at 3 Mile Island? And then we'll get Carl Grossman, who's one of the great, great experts on this. And then we're going to go to Moss Landing. So go ahead, Jill.
Hi, Harvey. Thanks for having me on. I just wanted to let people know I was there in 1979. I was 15 years old. And the biggest problem, what I'm seeing is obviously they're not looking. They don't look, they don't find it. They stopped the studies too soon. And I took it in my own hands. Going back in 2003, I was back on book tour for my books. And my neighbors who I sat down with and had lunch went around and around the table. 34 people, cancer, brain cancer, leukemia, prostate cancer, breast cancer, autism, MS. The list went on and on. Then 2 years later, my brother called. He goes, I have a brain tumor. And then he calls and he has basal cell carcinoma. Then he calls in 2012 and he says, I have a brain tumor. Thyroid cancer. And that was the same year I was diagnosed with a brain tumor in 2012. And then 2023, just recently, a little while ago, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. So I took it on myself to go back to Pennsylvania numerous times to sit down with the people in the 4 counties surrounding 3 Mile Island and ask them. I recorded them with a camera, and also by paper, they submitted a testimonial explaining what happened to them, where they were in 1979, what happened to not only them. So the problem was I asked one testimonial per page, but they would start talking about their whole family and then their whole neighborhood. So I had probably over 1,000 testimonials of people, and I plotted it on the map. I just included it in the chat there, and I have it saved as a spreadsheet and also as a PDF. And I've been trying to get traction to get an independent agency to test our soil, to test the people. Been working with Aaron Datesman. He's trying to do some work to show that the myth of a low dose is fine. It's not fine. Any dose is dangerous and does damage the DNA, which results in cancers later, years, decades later. And that's the problem. They skip over the latency nature of being exposed to iodine radiation. They also don't track where you have your cancers. I'm from Pennsylvania, born and raised. My brother is too. He lives in Florida. His three diseases were tracked there. My brain tumor was taken out in Colorado. I live in Portland, Oregon now, too close to Hanford, and that's where they recorded my thyroid cancer. So there's not a clear picture of what's going on around the nuclear reactors. But if you talk to the people on the ground, you get a very clear picture.
Right. Well, it was clear as hell when I was there because it was right after the accident. And then they were saying, it's all psychological. Rolling Stone would not print my article, by the way. I mean, I wrote this up and they said, well, they wouldn't touch it. I did get an op-ed in the New York Times, which was quite amazing, on the anniversary of the accident, right next to one from Thornburg, the governor.
Well, Mary, who you met with, Mary Osborne, they have taken her collection and it's now in the Smithsonian. However, we're still not addressing what's happening to the people on the ground. If you're curious what's happening in March 30th, 1979, my high school, Central Senior High School, was closed at 12 o'clock. We were sent home on the buses. They told us to keep the windows up because of iodine 131. The glass can stop it. I still got thyroid cancer. My brother still did. Thyroid cancer is off the charts in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is the leading state for thyroid cancer right now, and will continue to be most likely with 9 nuclear reactors in our state. But what happened was they closed my school down. They made it a Red Cross emergency evacuation center. They brought mothers down from Middletown, this town that is the home to 600 of their employees at TMI. And then fast forward, when I was there scouting the location for my movie Plutonium Skies, I went into my old high school with my math teacher from my earlier days. I'm still in contact with her. The school hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed outside is says York Learning Center instead of York Senior High School. And I asked her what happened. And we're talking with the woman giving us the tour. Everything looks the same. I'm like, this will be perfect to film here. It looks exactly the same as it was when I was here, when I was 15, 16, 17. And she goes, we now service a population of children ages 5 to 21 that have Asperger's, autism, and other neurological diseases.
Good.
York has its own autism society. That's highly unusual. The population of York itself, just the city's only 40,000. It was 41,000 when I lived there in 79. And they have 6 locations and they service 10,000 people, students, not all with Asperger's and autism, but there was something desperately wrong with the second and third generation. My neighbor across the street, her son was born with autism. And then there's Thong, THON. There's a 46-hour dance event they do every year with Penn State. So Penn State University, their students dance for their fellow students with cancer, their football players with cancer, their football players that have children that have cancer. They dance to raise millions of dollars. Then they gave it to the 4 Diamonds, which is located right there. And they only give money back to the 4 counties of people with cancer. So it's just like, it's so blatant.
And of course, it's not studied. And you can debate guys from the industry and they say, well, there's no evidence that any of this has done any harm. And so, we want to avoid that going forward, as well as deal with the reality now. Carl Grossman, you want to chime in, and then we'll go back to Joe Mangano?
Sure. Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Great, good. Well, I did a documentary for my Enviro Video TV production nonprofit company on 3 Mile Island in 1992. It's titled 3 Mile Island Revisited. And I put the URL, the link onto the chat. In the documentary, incidentally, are Dr. Jay Gould and Ernest Sternglass, who are founders of Radiation and Public Health Project. And importantly, in that video, they trace where the fallout from 3 Mile Island went. Again, this was early on, and the impacts in terms of mortality, death, and cancer, with a lot of it was upstate New York, incidentally, where the fallout went. The video begins, incidentally, because part of the focus is on mutations, with a 2-headed calf, stillborn from a farm very near the nuke. And of all people, Don Hewitt, executive producer of 60 Minutes and founder of 60 Minutes, he gave me a phone call at the university at which I teach, saying in the documentary, you talk about all the settlements, up to $1 million that were paid out by the utility, but the deal was that there were gag orders. The people weren't supposed to speak about the impacts of 3 Mile Island on them in terms of health and so forth. I had one, it was so sad, a woman who said, I'm going to speak anyway. Also, just one last thing regarding Don Hewitt, Harvey, and you would appreciate this. He said, like in the video, you have this fellow, Harvey Wasson, carrying on about radiation, radioactivity, keeps carrying on about radiation. And I said, Mr. Hewitt, that's the issue with nuclear technology, radioactivity and its consequences.
Right. And, they were claiming it was all psychological. I stood in Middletown looking at the nuke, and somebody handed me a black Cocker Spaniel that had been born with no eyes. I mean, I guess it was psychological. Carl is one of the great pioneers of the no nukes movement. Joe, really good to have you. Joe Mangano, I'm going to give you a tentative last word, because then we're going to go to Brian Roeder, and we're going to talk about what just happened with this lithium plant. And and then we're going to later talk about solar panels, and we're going to see, are we on the same track here? What's going on, Joe?
My final comment is, I'll repeat that as far as HHS and Kennedy go, we have absolutely nothing to lose. That we should propose a study to start with. I mean, the eventual goal is to have some sort of a monitoring system of health near all plants. But I think we should try to go for a quick hit, something that can be studied and published within a year or so. You know how politics are. 4 years from now, who knows what's going to be happening? With the stamp of approval from the government to be made public.
Okay.
If we don't cover everything possible in there, every react, that's okay. But we need to at least get this started.
Well, don't leave, because you
No.
guys, you three are the great experts on our 70-year history with atomic power, which has been, a tragedy. And now we're waltzing into the world of lithium batteries, and there are millions of cars driving around. Somebody wrote in the chat that they burned a Tesla dealership. Well, the question then becomes, how much lithium got burned from those cars? And I understand the sentiment, but we got to be careful here. Brian Roeder, you've been recommended by Sarah to to talk about what happened with this lithium fire. Do you want to segue in from nuclear power? You're near Diablo Canyon, and now you're hit from the back door here. What's going on?
Well, actually, we're in Monterey, on the Monterey Bay, and the name of our power plant was the Vistra Moss Landing BESS, Battery Energy Storage System. It was the largest battery storage facility in the world, and now it's been destroyed. Our group, Never Again Moss Landing, got involved almost immediately. We were just residents. I live 8 miles from the plant to the east. We came together on the Monday after the plant burned and tried to bring our community together for the purpose of seeing what we could do about what had occurred and how we were going to try and understand it. A couple of short facts for you. I've been speaking to people around the world who have taken notice of this situation and who have looked at the data that our citizen group collected. And that data was collected at 124 sites, something that the government was unable to pull together using the assistance of Biomax Environmental here locally, an environmental hygienist who helped us put these together and allowed us to do it in a proper chain of custody approach that validated the results that came from ALS Labs in Salt Lake City. What those results show is that when we tested for cobalt, nickel, lithium, and manganese, the most distant locations were registering down around 1, 2, 3, 4 parts per billion on surface samples. And the heaviest hit areas, we're looking at 200, 300, 400, 500 times that amount, parts per billion, 2 to 500 parts per billion in metals like cobalt and nickel. Now that fire burned probably at about 5,000 degrees, which took those metals and vaporized some of them. It didn't destroy them, turned them into nanoparticles, and those spread across this entire area, entering into people's lungs. Most people seem to be fairly healthy, and those folks may have thought they caught a cold, but they probably, many of them, inhaled. We don't yet know if they're toxic levels because the interpretation of our data is very challenging. It doesn't really exist. We're trying to find folks who can help us with that. But the people who had health issues, such as bronchial problems or immunodeficiency issues, such as my wife, who served in the Air Force, was near the burn pits, those folks got clobbered. My wife set up a moss landing plant symptoms group at Facebook. There's now over 4,000 people who've joined that site, hundreds and hundreds of entries of people experiencing rashes, burns, breathing problems, eye and nose, breathing, eye, nose issues. Some people have bloody noses. So these all seem pretty minor, but they're indicative of what went out into our environment. Additionally, because of these batteries have inside of them hydrofluorine, hexafluorine as a conductor, that came out. The EPA came in and monitored from ground stations, but hexafluorine is lighter than air. So that went up into the air about 2,000 feet and hit the marine layer where there's salts. And if you do a Google search, you'll find that salt in the air, in the water, mixing with hexafluorine converts into hydrofluoric acid and hydrochloric acid. Seems like a lot of people breathe that in, and that might be part of the reason for the breathing problem. So we have a lot of people who don't even really know this happened here. We've been trying very hard to get the media to cover this. We've had some success. There's an article in the New York Times. Bloomberg's looking at this now. And it's been 2 months. The EPA says it's monitoring, but again, it doesn't seem like it's monitoring what happened. I had folks from East Palestine reach out and say that our experience resembles what their experience has been with the government. The state, unfortunately, doesn't know what to do about this. They're not engaging. Our senator is Senator Laird, who has a track record of support for this. And by the way, just to be clear, I'm just a guy. I was a big advocate of decarbonization. I still am. Our organization says never again Moss Landing because if these things are going to burn, they can't do it anymore. The other day, Laird went on a YouTube presentation, and he said that 75% of the plants currently built or under plan are using the new formulation, which is less likely to burn and more stable. And that's true, but they still burn. And if they do, they're even more toxic. Now, Moss Landing was unique because this corporation out of Texas, Vistra, put 100,000 batteries inside of this giant building about 3 football fields long. And because it was already a power plant, they didn't have to really get any permits or pass any hurdles. And I think all that's going to start to change because of this disaster. But the damage has been done in this area, and most people don't know about it. And we were talking earlier about the cancers. I just think it's highly likely they're going to occur in high quantities, given what it is people have breathed in. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's really relevant to tell you. It's pretty shocking. Back to the state. We've had almost no support from the state because, of course, this flies in the state's agenda of trying to get these power, plants and even local. And by the way, folks may not know this, but the California Energy Commission is approving about 12 installations a month. Now, many of those are very small. Here in Santa Cruz, right adjacent to Monterey County, the next county over, there are 3 scheduled. Each of them would be a local community BESS plant, collecting off the rooftops and then pushing the power right back out almost immediately at night. But if they go bad, if somebody runs a car into them and they go off, they're going to mess up that community. So the tech itself is very problematic, and it's unfortunate because it's a real problem that the state doesn't know how to deal with. But I'm hearing from people in Australia, Ireland, England, Canada so far, and they're saying that they're fighting the same fight. They're using what's happened in Moss Landing as an example of what it is that they're up against, and they're very, very afraid that something like this can happen in their countries. That's kind of what I've got as some opening thoughts.
Wow. Well, you and Joe and Carl and Jill should be in touch so that you'll know how to set up the studies that we never got at 3 Mile Island. I mean, this has to be, there has to be a baseline laid down right away so that we can monitor this, going forward.
I'm trying to line up those resources. We don't have any funding. Got a website.
Right. We
I'm
never
basically
do.
paying for all this myself because someone's got to. We have our website up. We just built it. And we're building the car while we do the racetrack at 200 miles an hour, right? You've heard that before. That's what we're doing.
Of course.
We don't have enough profit or anything. We're just trying to find a way to collect and get information out. We've done 2 rounds of testing, the main and then a secondary one that we did after the fire, after the second fire. So what happens, these batteries are there when they're exposed and they get water on them, they can catch on fire. And they can't touch the rubble pile because there's a wall that's 50-foot high that's been destabilized. And they have to get that stabilized before they can start removing this material. They don't even know where they're going to put it. I met with our supervisor this morning to get a most recent briefing. So, and I met with John Laird about 3 weeks ago, and he really he hasn't really come through for us. So the county's trying to do what they can, but they've been waiting on the state. The state's not coming. They haven't figured out how to deal with what's happened without abandoning this. And it's a tragic thing. There are a lot of people that are really hurt and suffering. A lot of people lost their homes. We're having to move. My wife is so sick, we actually had to move to another house. We've been in Airbnb since January 28th, and we're lucky because we can get out. This is a working class community, lots of livestock, people who have retired. A lot of people are really sick and they can't get out. Just crazy.
God, it's just mind-boggling and all too familiar. And and we had, by the way, lithium cars that burned in Palisades and Eaton here in LA. God knows what contributions they've made to the disaster. Sarah Amanoff, do you want to speak, and Madeline, and then we'll go back to Joe Mangano and talk about the methodology of what needs to be done here. Sarah?
Sure. Oops. Yeah, hi. I don't think I have my video on. So, yeah. So one of the things that people are really concerned about is the food supply here, because the testing is just not adequate. And so we have Food Not Bombs testimonial that some local farmers are trashing their crops while others feel that they need to keep selling their harvest or face going out of business. Let me put my video on if that helps, but yeah, that definitely helps. So that really worried me. So that was a testimonial from Food Not Bombs. And he basically said that they're turning around produce from Moss Landing and Watsonville areas, even though there's people who are food insecure. That's going to school lunches. That's 70% of the vegetables sold in the US that comes from that area. And so people are asking, well, what about the Driscoll berries? Things that are sold in Trader Joe, Whole Foods, all our stores. And so all it says is it comes from Watsonville. And so someone wrote, well, Driscoll berries are not even in season. They're from Oxnard right now, a few other places, but you don't know where your produce is coming from. And you don't know, if this stuff is safe or not, because, Monterey County is saying, oh, well, it's all the area is safe and people are sick. And not only people sick, the workers in the fields are impacted, and they're telling us that they're ill or they're too sick to return to work. And so we need a better investigation. So I'm so thankful to be here. And one of the things we don't have officials with backgrounds in toxic and hazard investigation and remediation. So, our county health officer, I don't even think they have a sufficient background that includes toxicology and health effects and toxic exposure. This is hydrogen fluoride. This is, they don't have a background for emergencies that require evacuation, yet they fast track these BESS batteries. Are going up near our farmland. They're going up in Petaluma, where our dairy is. We have this paradise, and this isn't even for keeping the lights on. This is for the new data centers. And then we're trading out the data centers for our food supply. So I just wanted to make that really clear.
This whole meme about data centers really got undercut, thankfully, when DeepSeek came in, this new AI operating system, and seems to have undercut this whole argument about the need for massive quantities of power for data centers. But that's a separate kind of leg of the issue. Madeline,
Yes.
do you speak, Madeline?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just real quick, I just want to make sure I get one thing in, and then I can talk about other things. I'm a chemist. I'm a scientist. I think like a scientist. And
Good.
so
Somebody
when
has.
so when this first happened, I must say I did the same thing I did during the CRZ fires. I got the EPA AQI app and I started monitoring the air because it looked terrible, and I heard I need to keep my windows closed, etc. And of course I knew at that point that this lithium battery facility had exploded. And what I found so baffling and so upsetting was that the readings, whether I took them at Santa Cruz or Moss Landing, always read the same. Every 4 hours approximately, I was monitoring using this app, and they were always the same and always in the good zone. And I thought, gee, that's very peculiar, because that app seemed to work pretty well, in my opinion, because I would look outside during the CRZ fires, see dense material falling out of the air, and the air quality was poor. And then as the air got better, the number went down, went back into the good. So that was my first indication that something is not, these sensors cannot possibly be reading this correctly. So the thing that I wanted to really put to say is, and I'll come back to this idea, is that this is definitely premature technology. So we need better BESS, the battery energy storage system designs, and safe operational instruments, right? Like these monitors I'm talking about, suppression and safety equipment, and training, and maybe even for the residents that live nearby, we have the right to know codes and standards, monitoring, and by design, when these BESSes are properly operated, they spew toxic materials. They are designed to actually vent out of the atmosphere the surrounding the fallout, right? We know that it consists of cobalt, lithium, nickel, and manganese, right? So even during correct operational procedures, these materials are falling out. We have elevated levels of these materials. So that in part is what actuaries at insurance companies include in their risk and liabilities assessment to calculate insurance premiums for residents who live near BESSes, if they can get the insurance. Insurance companies also conduct BESS safety inspections when calculating the risks, liabilities, and homeowners insurance costs. Insurance companies seem to be way more interested and ahead of the BESS industry in terms of safety risks and liabilities. And in my opinion, maybe even indirectly better understand the negative impacts of residents' health and environment than our BESS leaders, than our leaders that we are relying on that appear to not be nearby. So those are the ideas that I really wanted to get out, other than I am for decarbonization. I am not necessarily against this technology. What I am against is that we don't have a nuclear regulatory commission. We need a nuclear lithium battery commission is really what we need, so that the Vistra is accountable. They don't need to be accountable at the moment, but none of the BESS industry needs to be accountable. And so without these code standards, regulations, a regulatory commission, we are not going to be able to be proactive. And in fact, there's this idea about putting the onus on the producer rather than having us at the moment, right? You heard from Brian, we have to prove environmental harm. How about Vistra, if we had a precautionary principle, how about Vistra proves to us that this technology is safe?
Well, this is deja vu all over again here. I know, I understand the sentiment. The last thing you want is a nuclear regulatory commission. There's a criminal operation, and as Carl and Joe and Jill know, I mean, the NRC is completely corrupt, and they never saw a nuclear plant that they didn't love, and they never saw a death from radiation that they weren't willing to attribute to Wonder Bread or something else. So. So we have to get this, we have to nip this before we wind up with the equivalent of 94 nuclear plants in the best world. And it's a horrible, horrible price to pay. But this message has to go out. And so, Joe, Carl, Jill, do you want to jump in real quick? And so we can link these two issues, and then we're going to talk about solar panels as well. I mean, as an advocate, for 70 years for renewable energy, batteries have always been a key part of the argument. And then we're finding out that there are problems with. At least you have an insurance industry that's willing to insure these things. Yeah, no insurance company has ever stepped forward to insure a nuclear power plant. They got a federal law in 1957 that exempted nuclear reactors from an insurance requirement. So there you go. Somehow you've got insurance companies involved with bets. Never happened with nuclear power and won't happen. They've been exempted going forward. So the exemption on nuclear power plants is scheduled to go start to finish for 100 years. That's how bad it is. But so your insurance companies at least have given you a leg in or whatever. Brian, did you want to say something? I want to ask Joe, Carl, and Jill to comment on this. Okay, Joe, does this all sound familiar to you? Hold on, you're muted.
Yeah. It's a different poison, but it's the same dynamics as nuclear power and nuclear weapons.
Yes, and you guys are right next door to Diablo Canyon, for God's sakes. Talking about a 1-2 punch. We've dealt with what's his name, your state senator on Diablo Canyon, and he's been a slippery slope, to put it mildly. And we've been totally stabbed in the back by Gavin Newsom. I mean, don't even mention that name. He's been a complete disaster at Diablo Canyon. We had an agreement, you may know, signed by everybody in 2018. Jerry Brown, Gavin Newsom, the legislature, the regulatory agencies, the unions, the local governments, the enviro groups in 2018. Everybody signed this brilliant phase-out plan, and it was a great plan, to shut Diablo in 24 and 25. And Newsom waltzed in 22 and sabotaged it. And he's not going to help you at Moss Landing, I'll tell you. Yeah.
What folks are going to hear about this is a couple of things. First off, there's been other tests going on, but they haven't been testing in the right places and in the right way, starting with the EPA with their ground monitoring of the hexafluorine, which is lighter than air. That's right off the bat. And then there have been some other tests by the local government. And they're not looking at it from the perspective of what went into living creatures, right? There's just generally not that approach. It's more protocols and approaches. The other thing you're going to hear, and it came out from Governor Newsom's office fairly early, is that there are new battery technologies that are being put in place. They're putting them in individual lockers. They're using a new chemistry that is more stable. It's about, as I understand, about 27 degrees difference between the current battery chemistry and that chemistry, so they can still pop. But that's the way that it's being pivoted away from, well, that's old tech. Yeah, 4-year-old tech. That's old tech. It's much safer now. So don't worry about this. And it doesn't look like it was that bad anyway. So that's kind of the line that's coming out. And that's how there's an attempt being made to basically move on as people look at their cell phones and forget and move on and all the craziness in the world. But, we're just trying to make sure that people realize that that's not where the story ends, because it isn't. This is going to go on for a long time.
Can I make comment?
Please.
100,000 lithium batteries, about 5,000 tons times 2,000 pounds per ton equals about 10 million pounds of toxic waste. And we have a thing called the law of conservation of matter. So whether it's in the air, the soil, or the water, it's going to go somewhere. And so Dr. Ivano Elio study at San Jose State University is a very good study to do because he has baseline measurements of particularly nickel and cobalt. And he's been studying Elkhorn Slough for decades. And so one thing he saw a lot of very different things going on after the 16th. He actually did see not only fallout, but he also saw hazardous material and pretty big chunks. And what he found is, nickel and cobalt were either like 0 ppm parts per million or 50 parts per million, maybe 100 parts per million. After the fire, thousands, 2 orders of magnitude higher. And this is what was really disturbing also for me, is everyone is saying that the food supply is fine. And how can the food supply be fine if we're getting measurements from Dr. Aiello like this, and we have nearby farms? organic farms even. Where's the USDA? Where's the United States Department of Agriculture recertifying these farms, either organic or not, just as a safe food supply? And then, then it obviously trickles down into the water, but it's not going to disappear unless we remediate and get those hazardous materials back out of the soil, air, and water. We're going to be living with it for generations.
Oh yeah, it's horrible. Just for your reference, after I went into three, and then we'll go to Jill. After I went down to 3 Mile Island and wrote it up, and Rolling Stone wouldn't run it. I said, and it was very clear. You couldn't mistake what was going on. People were just an animal just dropping dead in front of you. I mean, just horrifying. It was like being in a Japanese science fiction movie, which is, I'm sure, how you feel now where you are. It's horrifying. So I decided that the only way to make the case was to go to all the different places that we knew atomic radiation had impacted people. I went to Rocky Flats, where the plutonium facility. Norman Solomon wrote about the downwinders. The great resource that we had, and I don't know if Bob's on the call, Robert Alvarez, who's really the godfather of radiation and health research, was on the staff of John Glenn, Senator Glenn, and they actually broke the realities of Agent Orange. And then they come, and Bob, the workers at Hanford, we studied, all over the place, and then put in context of 3 Mile Island. And so the book became Killing Our Own. It's free on the internet. I was actually on the Today Show with it a couple of times, and it makes the connections. So you may want to take a look at Killing Our Own, because this is right in the middle of all this. It's radiation, it's lithium, and we cannot go forward based on what you're saying. We cannot go forward and advocate a series of lithium batteries in light of what's happened here.
Like a terrorist attack.
Well, but the technology itself has to be dealt with. They would never give us the time of day on nuclear power. But let's put it this way, in 1974, 5 years before 3 Mile Island, Richard Nixon said there'd be 1,000 nuclear plants in the U.S. by the year 2000. In the year 2000, there were 104. And the only reason those 896 didn't get built is because we fought them. Because they could have got all the money they ever needed from the government had we not built the no nukes movement. So now we're on the cusp of putting lithium batteries everywhere on Earth and on cars. And we got to deal with the realities of this technology. And unfortunately, you guys are, right in the...
Senator Laird put it were the test subjects. And the way that
God forbid, God help you.
Scientist for the Coastal Commission put it is that apparently we're guinea pigs, quote unquote. Now, she was being sympathetic in saying that. I'm not sure what John was being when he said that we were test subjects, but that's a different story.
Well, the Coastal Commission screwed us at Diablo Canyon, too.
Well, just to be clear, if I can, what's amazing, they weren't even involved in this decision. What's extraordinary about this, folks, is that the plant was there, the use was there, so they saw this simply as a change out of technology. But the utility of the plant was established. The permit's been there since the 50s, so it didn't get above the Planning Commission. It wasn't even looked at by the supervisors or by the Coastal Commission or anybody else. So there were the largest industrial facility on the Monterey Bay was passed by the good folks of our Planning Commission, who have probably not the qualifications to actually review what was being fed to them after the state said this was fine and the company came in and said, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, right.
The company said, it's right there in their application, the worst case scenario, one day and one battery rack would burn. Worst case scenario. The fire department had no capability to do with this. The county had no capability to do with this. The resources that are needed are at the state and federal level, and they're not coming. The cavalry is not coming.
One advantage you have over the fight against nuclear power in the early days is that nuclear power was completely intermeshed with the military, as Joe Mangano knows, as we're finding now with the nuclear test issue. So maybe you're going to get free of that. Maybe that's why the insurance industry got involved. We have to coordinate on this. This has to be written about. This is extremely, extremely important. And the one place that we might get some resources is the insurance industry, because if they're going to insure these plants, they're going to be interested in your data. Because if you can go, they're not going to take this lightly. The insurance industry.
The other thing that's happening now is that the personal injury firms are looking at, I think, multi-billion-dollar
Oh
settlements.
God, yes, God,
And of
yes.
course, they're all around now. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good, some of them just kind of are here. Everybody's trying to figure out what they can do at that point. And they're the ones that probably will expend significant resources to determine, liability. If there's negligence, I'm not saying there is because I don't want to get in trouble,
No,
right?
there is.
But all those
Absolutely.
things. So that's
Right.
going to be happening too.
So at this point in time, the insurance industry, and it will change, believe me, you might find people in the insurance company industry with resources who are going to be really interested in this. And as I say, when in 1957, the feds blocked the insurance industry from the nuclear issue. We've never had the insurance industry to deal with, right, Joe? I mean, they've been nowhere to be seen because of
Absolutely.
federal legislation. You haven't had that with batteries. I don't think the Congress is going to jump in and say that they're not allowed to insure. They don't have to insure these battery facilities. What do you think, Joe? And then we'll go to Sarah.
I don't think so. I mean, the Price Anderson Act you mentioned just limited liability
Yeah,
for utilities in case of a meltdown. And I'm even going to light a fire maybe by throwing in the 1986 law that eliminated lawsuits for vaccine harm, and replaced it with a vaccine court.
Sarah, go ahead, please,
Yeah, I
Sarah.
just wanted just to remind everyone that there's I think Brian, I have it on my computer, but there's like a very wide area. I think it's 50 miles of people who are impacted. This is 3 counties. People are saying, "Oh no, don't locate it in their houses." No, the toxic plume went to San Benito County, Monterey, Santa Cruz, and I believe Madeline could weigh in on, did it not even disappear? Did it just go straight up in the atmosphere? Did it turn into a chemical fog? So that would be one question. Also, we need next steps. Okay. We need next steps. So basically, locals are asking for oversight from the California Coastal Commission. Because guess what? There's more battery. What are we going to do about all the upcoming battery plants? When we have one fire. Thank you so much. See, that's a really big area, guys. That spans from people as far as San Jose, where smelling the metallic taste, to Santa Cruz. I have friends who are sick, in Scotts Valley. I mean, I believe it was was it Gilroy, or here it's Carmel. These are pristine places, and it's a special place because you have like a weather like Italy. So this fog comes in and somehow it commingles with the fog. And I'd be curious because people were saying they were getting these symptoms every time the fog was rolling in or it was raining. And if someone else wants to mention the reigniting of the battery plant, I believe it was not just January, February, then March 10th, somebody posted.
Right.
And what's about a year that it's going to take to demolish? If it takes a year to demolish, why are we not having an emergency moratorium? I mean, so there's a disaster.
Absolutely. Tatanka is your neighbor, and as I do want to go. Richard Lear is with us, and Timothy Sheckley, and they're going to talk now in a couple minutes about the solar panels that are going on our rooftops. Everybody in this call pretty much is an advocate of going green. So, but clearly, this is a major. We're not going to we're not going to stop lithium batteries, but there needs to be a way to make this technology safe. Just a point of fact, you could never make nuclear power safe. It is not possible to make a nuclear power plant that is both economic and safe. And you know who told us that? The guy who built the first one, Hyman Rickover, the admiral in the U.S. Navy, built Shippingport. And before 1960, as they were finishing, he said, this technology will never be both safe and economical, and it can't be scaled. This was the guy who did it. Now, I don't know what the technological limitations are going to be of lithium batteries, but you guys are going to find out. unfortunately for you. But that's the reality here. This is a very, very big moment. I'm a journalist. You got to get some journalists on this. But there must be local writers. This has to be written up. It will go out on the internet and it will have an impact.
We're getting a lot of
Absolutely.
coverage. We're getting a lot of coverage, and that's one of the places where we're working really hard.
Well, make sure you send it to me and have a website. But I'm at solartopia@gmail. And Tatanka is your neighbor, and we're involved with Pacifica. And this story has to go out. This is
Get a Pacifica journalist in charge in contact with us, please.
well, easier said than done, but you've got a station there. You've got a Pacifica station. Now, if the Pacifica station will do a story on this, we can send the story to our 250 affiliates.
They have sent out a query. They've already done a couple of stories.
Please, yes. And Tatanka here is the chair of the KPFK board. And Richard Lear, you're waiting. I know we're going to get right to you in a minute. You're also a scientist. I'm sure this stuff is of interest to you. And so go ahead, Tatanka.
Yeah, I just want to say, as we all know, things that took decades, we need to have everything is happening at once. So just remember, it was the Karen Silkwood case that Danny Sheehan successfully argued for the Karen Silkwood family after she died. We need to find the people. The studies have to be done. And if there's something very serious or some death happens, you have the legal team, okay? Because people overlook the fact that not only did Danny win the largest civil suit on behalf of somebody in nuclear power, but he got the limit to liability that people could sue nuclear power lifted to infinity, which stopped at that moment all private nuclear power plants. Here, there's a possibility of that. Plus, we've got to get together the whole Hollywood community. I mean, we need to document this in a more collapsed time frame. So if it comes to the state where we really get the word out how dangerous this is, we think clearly about the consequences. We think clearly about the marketability of it, not just locally, not just nationally, but globally, and do this campaign in a really, really smart way.
Right. And it's different. With nuclear, we became abolitionists. It's very clear that nothing about nuclear power was ever going to work. And 70 years later, that is absolutely true. And the small reactors is just as stupid as the big reactors.
And by the way, Harvey, I had another conversation with my old friend from the 60s and 70s who cooperated with Oliver Stone on that terrible nuclear movie. And I'm getting close to pitching him to debate you.
Oh, okay. Good. All yes. Right. Well, for some reason
he's still pitching the small nukes as safe, right?
Yeah, I keep winding up on the cutting room floor of anti-nuclear movements, but I'm in 2 pro-nuclear movies. So what can I tell you? But this is incredibly important, and we're really glad to have you with us. Now, Richard Lear Richard, if you'll introduce yourself, you were brought on with Tim Sheckley. We want to discuss the possible health impacts of solar panels on rooftops. We don't, just like we don't want to spread 10,000 lithium battery plants that are going to blow up. We don't want to have bad sine waves coming off of solar panels. So Richard, and then Tim, do you want to jump in and extend this conversation?
Absolutely. Hey, Tim, how are you doing?
So Richard and Tim have been brought to us by Camilla Reese. I don't know if she's on. We still have 77 people with us. Luka Doncic's number. You guys have kept it. Well, we have a very long attention span on these calls, and this is really monumental. So go ahead.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk a little bit about what is called dirty electricity. Many of you probably never heard of it. It's electromagnetic interference that basically is propagated on your wires of your home or your office based on us plugging in all these crazy technologies, anything with an AC adapter, fans, solar, all these different technologies convert AC to DC. So that's the simple thing. That conversion creates aberrant waves. They're not sine waves. They're sawtooth waves. They're coming in spurts in all sorts of different ways. They are basically creating up to 2 volts of extra electricity coming out of your wires. They're coming into the room. They come in. They basically attach to your body. They trigger your immune system to do crazy things. And this has been around for a while. I mean, the two big papers written on this were back in 2005, 2007. Magda Havas and Sam Milham did papers on dirty electricity. Magda took it into schools. She put filters in a school and filtered out the dirty electricity. And what she found was 16 behaviors, I think, improved 22%. Students were paying attention. They were more present. ADHD was decreased. There was more learning. And she was amazed. This was in some Canadian schools, 4 or 5. Then she went to Minnesota and Wisconsin, did it again. Sam Milham did some other things with dirty electricity, monitored it. And he's been on the, he's passed away now, but he's been on the, the electrification of America, how back in the 20th century, states that weren't electrified yet had no cancer and no diabetes and nothing, like Arkansas or something like that. And then as soon as they got it in like 1920, 1925, all that would happen. So I spoke on this forum a couple of weeks ago. I also wrote a paper on chronic health, and that's where the connection is. The chronic health crisis that we're in today, which I enumerated in the last call and wrote a paper in 2016, is powerful. And now in Washington, they're talking about actually addressing it for the first time. It didn't just start. In 2016, we had already had 25 years of increasing health effects across 36 fast-growing diseases, all more than doubled. The average American now is experiencing 2.1 or 2.3 of these diseases. Some of the light ones, ADHD and things like that, but Alzheimer's, ADHD, depression, anxiety, both diabetes, hypothyroidism, erectile dysfunction, only 3 cancers. So when I looked at this paper and looked at this, the U.S. government basically confirmed this with NIH paper on the core cause, which is a single molecule in the body. We'll call it P factor for now. And I started looking at the exogenous causes, and one of the exogenous causes is wireless. We talked about that 2 weeks ago. This is dirty electricity, and you don't see it, you don't smell it, you feel it. And there are filters that you can put in your house and remove it. And people who do that often have dramatic change in their environment. Almost everyone that installs these filters said, wow, it's calmer. The kids are calmer. Why? Because our bodies are not adapted to have all this electrical energy coupling to the body, because it's very disruptive to neurological systems, immune system, 7 factors that get formed. It's basically a system that happens: oxidative stress, autonomic dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction. So in the body, a lot of chaos is going on. So dirty electricity, like electromagnetic fields from wireless, does cause a problem. And so most of us don't know about it, but suddenly people are opening their ears and going, oh, I'm sick. And, no one's explaining why you're sick. No one's explaining what all these chronic diseases. And the big one is like, everybody in this call has headaches, sleep disturbances, anxiety, irritability. I mean, this is modern life in America. This was not the way it was. I can see a lot of you were living during the 80s, the 70s, and the 60s. We lived in the 60s. We had more reason to be stressed than ever.
Richard, you're muted for some reason. You need to unmute, Richard.
Oh,
Go ahead.
So I went through that whole conversation without anyone hearing me.
It was when you said in the 60s and then you blipped out.
Oh, okay.
It happens, if you lived in the 60s, you really weren't there.
Yeah. I mean, if you lived in the 1960s, we experienced some of the most dramatic upturn in society, economics, environment, war, everything, peace in the world. And yet, I remember being in the 60s, we had race riots in Washington, D.C., and we were not nearly as stressed as we are today with nothing going on in Boulder. It's like, it's really, there are things going on in the world. It's crazy. But why? Because we've introduced not only nuclear energy or electrical energy, but all sorts of chemicals and all sorts of pesticides. And all of these things do one thing. They trigger peroxynitrite in the body, which NIH says is the smoking gun to chronic disease, in the most beautiful paper ever written in 2007. And no one's ever heard of it. Peroxynitrite's been indicted by 14,000 scientists. So the scientists know all about it. Doctors can't spell it. You've never heard it. What is it? the immune system creates peroxynitrite, which damages 97 systems in the body. And it's introduced because the innate immune system is going, I don't know what's happening here. I don't get it. I don't know what this pesticide is. I don't know what this chemical is or this electrical energy. So that's the bigger thing. I needed to give that framework because you guys won't care about dirty electricity unless you know why it's nasty. And it's the easiest thing to fix. You can't change pesticides in your food. You can't take a peel out of your organic food, which is something you guys should be talking about and probably are talking about. You can't stop the nuclear stuff. You can't stop the wireless in your neighborhood, but you can stop dirty electricity. And you can stop it because you can filter it or you don't use those devices. Now, no one's going to stop using their devices, but every time you plug in these devices to change AC and DC electricity exchange, you're creating a surge, and it can be measured. And I don't have the meter right here, but you can. It's palpable. You can see 1,000 microwatts. You can see 2,000 microwatts. When you put solar on your roof, it's the worst. That is the number one contributor to high levels of dirty electricity, which are becoming increasingly difficult to stop. The people who are doing solar know how to fix this. They may or they may not. In the meantime, you have to either buy a whole house solution filter or individual filters. Now, caveat emptor. I founded a company called GreenWave. We sell dirty electricity filters, but I'm not here to sell this. I haven't even talked about GreenWave in 5 years. I'm just, I'm a founder, but I'm not with that company. But this company and Stetzer and some other companies are creating these have created filters. And when you put them in your house, you can reduce the amount of dirty electricity. And solar is the big one, but even solar is getting harder. So it's another invisible threat that's coming down the road. Nowhere near the power of nuclear. So I'm resonating with all you guys on the call who are fighting that fight, and it's a hard fight to fight. This is an easier one. This can be fixed. And this is something that you can see the palpable results by plugging in filters or unplugging all your stuff. And your health, I guarantee you, in 2 weeks, less headaches, less anxiety, less depression, less sleep issues, less irritability. You feel more part of life. It's not going to change your life entirely, but you'll see it. So that's the basic story of dirty electricity. If you want to see a more formal paper, it's in the chat. I wrote this paper in 2019. It's not dated, really. It's a 30 or 40-page paper, and it really goes through the science. There is science behind this, good science. A lot of it's made by the U.S. government. And it's still good, believe it or not.
Well, Richard, I assume you have a website. We're going to go to Tim Sheckley now. Tim and I had a long conversation yesterday or the day before about AC and DC power and how to really deal with solar panels. Again, we're advocates. We're not abolitionists. As you pointed out, Richard, there are things that can be done.
Yeah,
so
it's the easiest thing to do.
Well, put up your website if you want, greenwavefilteronc.com. And Tim Sheckley, let's go through the solar panel discussion. What can you tell us about? I mean, I had a contract to put solar panels on my roof. I was ready to do it, and Gavin Newsom drove the company into bankruptcy, so I'm still not there. But go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Harvey. I have.
Introduce yourself. You have a serious credential, and Richard, you too. I mean, I didn't introduce you, but we're used to that. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I've been in developing products and technologies and international standards for about 45 years in all areas of industrial stuff, industrial and consumer products. Focused a lot on the smart meter issues over the years, and particularly this dirty electricity issue. I was also on the faculty for about 10 years of the University of Colorado College of Engineering, and as well as developing several companies as well, my own company. However, what I work on these days is international standards for exactly how to do solar and storage correctly, and how to adapt it to a real applications what I can make some observations about the industry. The things that Richard said about dirty electricity, I completely agree with. The technical term for dirty electricity is conducted and radiated harmonic emissions. Harmonic emissions are the garbage signals that get imposed on wiring and that come out of badly designed equipment. The conducted emissions are the actual dirty electricity itself coming out of the equipment onto the home wiring, and then it gets radiated too, because a lot of it's at a radio frequency. And also the conducted those are the conducted emissions, and the radiated emissions are actually the radio interference that emerges directly from the equipment. And both of those are very closely related. They're essentially the same for all practical purposes, and it can all be filtered out if the equipment is designed correctly. To do that, it can be perfectly clean without any spurious signals at all. But the problem is we live in a capitalist economic system that it makes it very important to cut costs of all products to maximize the return on investment to investors and to the rewards for the managers of these companies. So they're all competing to make the cheapest thing they can. So all the devices you go out and buy, for instance, to charge your phone or run a computer, any kind of low voltage device, and most of the stuff now is low voltage, 6 to 12 volts DC. These are these plug-in power supplies, wall plug power supplies are lacking the proper filtering, and they're using switching power supplies, which actually deliberately create essentially radio frequency signals, but then they don't take the effort and cost to put in the simple filter components that would remove those radiated and conducted emissions. So that's the big problem. It's all the stuff you buy. Compact fluorescence lights were the worst thing in the world from that respect. In that respect, but all the little power supplies are questionable. Some are better than others. It just depends on what the quality of the manufacturer. As far as solar systems are concerned, there's no radiation coming from the solar panel itself. It's producing DC, just like it was a battery on your roof. But the problem is that we have an AC power system, an electric power grid, and the strategy before there were any kind of batteries, really practical, wasn't a practical solution. The first solar systems were designed to use an inverter. It's a device that converts the DC power from the solar panel into AC power that's then fed directly into the power grid, into your through your house. It goes into the power grid, and it's called the method that is the electric power company compensates you for doing that by you're providing that power by what's called a net metering tariff, where you buy and sell at the same price. In other words, for all the power you put in from your solar panels, you can buy it back at the same price, just to use for your own home appliances and stuff. But that's the problem with that strategy, is that when more than 15% of the people, that's a rough number, most of 15% of the people in your neighborhood do the same thing with feeding power into the grid during the day. It overtaxes the capacity of the distribution system, the transformers that go, and the wiring in the local neighborhood is just overburdened, and it can't do more. So they have to curtail that power, or prevent people from doing that, and not permitting people to hook up solar systems. The solution to all this is to get rid of the whole net metering concept, which is the wrong. It's no longer appropriate, and put batteries with every solar system.
But if the batteries are lithium based, now we've got a problem.
Right.
Right. Now let me very quickly, because this is a quick story, and it does have a quick point that you'll remember. So when power is generated at a place like Niagara Falls or these central generating facilities, it's generally DC, direct current. That means that the electrons flow continuously. But back in the day, when Edison was developing these power plants, the problem with direct current for him was that it didn't go far enough. It only could go a couple of miles in any force. And he had an assistant named Nikola Tesla, and he offered Tesla $50,000, which back then was a fortune, if Tesla could figure out a way to send electricity long distance. And so Tesla invented AC power, which for some reason, I don't know why, but goes back and forth, but it goes long distances. Now, all the major transmission, or most of it now, is AC, alternating current, goes back and forth instead of direct. And Tesla came to Edison and said, "Well, I solved the problem." And Edison stiffed him, didn't pay him. He was a bad guy, Edison. So as Tim said, solar panels, when they create electricity, it's DC, it's direct current, and it does not, to our knowledge correctly, have health impacts when you're around it. But AC does. And because AC was the dominant utility-based mode of transmitting electricity, all our appliances are AC. So when you've got a house full of appliances, they're on AC and they have health impacts. Correct me if I'm wrong along the way. So what Richard talks about is filtering the health impacts from the AC stuff. Technically, if all your appliances were DC, we wouldn't have that problem. But there are other problems with DC. I was told it requires thick cables. I don't know. So when people throw out AC DC, that's the difference, and that's the history. Richard, are you saying now? So I was going to put panels on my roof. Then you have to have an inverter that converts the DC power to AC. But that comes with health problems. So I would, not knowing this, I would have put these panels on my roof. I would have had now inverters can be put into individual panels, which really magnifies the problem, or you have one inverter that converts the bulk of the electricity coming from the panels from DC to AC, and that has health problems. You can also run the power through a battery, and the battery converts it or deals with the health problems. But that's a layman's and probably largely inaccurate description. Richard, do you want to take that up, and then Tim?
Yeah, I mean, you can, even with these individual plug-in filters, you can reduce dirty electricity significantly, and it's measurable. There's multiple meters out there. Our meter measures voltage, and you can see when you start, 1,500 or 1,700 millivolts rather. Micro or milli? Gosh, I'm trying to think. But it will go down to like 10. You can see it when you put the filters in. It can be reduced. So I don't think you should stop putting the solar in your house. You should go to a house that has solar, grab a couple filters and grab a meter, plug them in and see how much it gets reduced. But once you're under 40 or 30 level, you're probably okay. But it is palpable over 200 or 400, and it goes up in the thousands. So I wouldn't freak out about it. There are the people that are building solar systems can create a dirty electricity free or EMI free product. They haven't yet, but they can. It wouldn't be that expensive and it wouldn't be that hard. But like I think that Tim said, it's there's a cost benefit analysis, and not enough people are complaining because people don't blame ADHD on dirty electricity. They don't blame their kids irritability and kind of craziness on this. And yet when you do reduce it, sometimes that decreases immensely. And one thing that we saw at the very beginning when we started installing filters in people's houses, people were losing 5 or 10 pounds that were overweight. We had no idea why. People were just losing weight. We never advertised that, but we had testimonials. So
if I buy 3 of these filters, can I lose 30 pounds?
I think it's 4 pounds per filter. No, you should try, but it definitely regulates your system, and all the our whole system, the energy system that we operate on is built around the mitochondria. Mitochondria is creating energy, and the mitochondria is called mitochondrial dysfunction. Every cell there's a mitochondria, and this mitochondria is hugely affected by all these environmental factors. And if you can reduce the amount of stress on your biology and the mitochondria in particular, you'll get energy back and you won't be hungry. So that a lot of the metabolic diseases like diabetes and the people that are overweight, it's generated because of what's happening in the mitochondria. It's just a really big
isn't that mitochondria, isn't that word related to mushrooms somehow?
Maybe.
Or am I thinking of something else? Tim, go ahead, please. Thank you for that. Are you saying a single appliance filter in your house, put somewhere in your house, will cover your house? Is that what you're saying?
No. Typically, you'd think about 2,000 square foot home probably need 15 to 20 filters.
Okay. Well, people should look it up. You have a website. You posted it. Yeah.
It's greenwavefilters.com. I'll put it in again. But and again, I'm not here to sell this, but you can go to Stetzer, a competitor, try them. Whoever you try them, and if you don't like them, return them. But you will see a difference. And you're looking at a 2,000 square foot home about $350, $400. So it's not cheap, but health is expensive.
But then, in light of that discussion we've just had about the battery blow up, obviously people now who are getting solar panels are almost universally getting batteries as well. Now, the batteries right now, the ones coming from Tesla, which I think are still dominating the market, are lithium based. But there is a discussion, and I've seen quite a bit. Tim and I talked about iron air and also about sodium. And are those batteries going to be significantly safer, cheaper, cleaner? What do we think about that, Tim?
Yeah, there's a lot more issues behind this whole thing, and I wouldn't recommend anyone to install a net metering system with the kind of equipment that they're providing, that the installers provide for that. I think you have to go with batteries, and that's a completely different kind of inverter. It's a little more expensive, but it's designed to work with a battery integrated into the package, and it isn't designed primarily to feed power to the electric company. It's to use at your home, because that's the main concern these days, is to be able to have a reliable electricity, which the utility industry is not going to be able to provide in the future. So the battery technologies, I wouldn't recommend any using lithium batteries now. There are a lot of choices. It's an immature technology, and it's under development very fast. There is one company, for instance, the iron air you mentioned that I mentioned the other day it seems to be a very a good one, because it doesn't use any rare earth metals or any exotic materials. It's very simple, and it's the new factory's just been gone online in West Virginia to make these things at large scale. There's also a number of other older choices. The lead acid batteries, of course, have been around for 100 years, but there's a newer version, basically, that's a very sophisticated adaptation of that, called the AGM, absorbed glass mat carbon acid battery, and that's a development similar, but it's still just made out of carbon and iron a little bit, and then there's some nickel iron batteries have been around for many years. They use a liquid electrolyte, so it does take a little more maintenance. Thomas Edison invented those, and as well as a bunch of other battery technologies.
Let me just very quickly insert the term battery was actually, do you know who invented the term battery? It was Ben Franklin.
Yeah.
So that's how long batteries have been around. He came up with that. So the question then becomes, I'm sure many people on this call are either promoting solar or as an alternative to nuclear. And Sandy Bolzenius asked, who profits from nuclear plants? Let me get to that in 1 second. But if I now, I would have 6 months ago, but I'm now in any way, shape, or form going to put a lithium battery on my property. So is it now, are we in a position now of saying that we should not use lithium batteries in conjunction with solar panel installations on private houses?
I think the only reason to use a lithium battery is the power density, which is important in a vehicle, okay, a car. It's not important in your house. It doesn't matter how heavy the battery is. These other mature technologies are able to do that. And so there are alternatives. You just have to find installers that will put them in. The installers are pretty lazy. They just want to install the cheapest junk and on your house and walk away. They put in these microinverters that are horrible. And also keep in mind that a lot of this equipment is connected to the internet, and it dumps all that data directly into Google or somebody, and you don't need that. The purpose of a lot of consumer electronics these days is to gather data up to monetize your personal data. That's what it's for. And
Wow. Well, but of course now with lithium, with electric cars, it appears we're going to be stuck with lithium batteries for a while. And after hearing this report from Moss Landing, that seems to be, and of course we know in the LA fires and that electric cars did burn. So what are we going to do about lithium batteries in electric cars?
Well, there's other technologies that are being worked on, but they're not ready yet. The trouble is it was hyped up by Musk originally, and so the industry got heavily committed to it. There are older lithium technology that's not as anywhere near as dangerous, and it's called lithium iron phosphate. That's been used for many years in industrial applications, forklifts, golf carts, things like that. And lithium iron phosphate could be, you could buy those for your house. And I know people that have them, and they're not anywhere near as likely to catch on fire. They won't, they behave much differently. The ones in the cars are really high performance lithium manganese, largely. And they once they catch fire, you can't put them out, and water won't put them out. And it's, the story. Anyway.
Is there anything that you can put on a lithium fire that will put it out?
Well, I don't know.
Okay, all right.
I don't know the answer to that right now.
All right. Well, listen, we still have 61 people with us, and it's been amazing. This is the most technical, scientific 2 hours we've ever had on this call, but totally worthwhile. Richard, Tim, Madeline, it's just been really mind-boggling. Does anybody have any questions that they want to raise about this stuff? I know Donna Gilmore is on with us, and she's a technical expert on a deal of nuclear technologies. But this
Sluggo, we've got 5 people on stack.
Oh yeah, I can't see it for some reason.
That's okay. That's okay. We'll lead off with our engineer.
Oh yeah, Steve Caruso, go ahead.
Yeah, I was electronic technician / engineer for over 30 years. Most of what you're talking about is shielding. Shielding is like a cable. You have maybe 2 wires inside, and then on the outside you'll have a braid that absorbs any extraneous thing. Also with cabinets, electronic cabinets, electrical cabinets, you'll have what's called a Faraday cage where it's coated on the inside, and that takes any unusual emissions. It's like putting your phone in a microwave. Once it's in there and you close the door, nothing gets out. So you have the Faraday cage idea and the shielding idea, and that prevents, this is just basic electronic stuff. So you take all that energy from the shield to ground. So say you're going around your house, you put a foil blanket on, you got little foil straps hanging off your heels. You can walk around on the floor with you can't see this, but it's a blue piece of static mat we used to have in a factory where we assembled electronics. And what that did is absorb static. I was in charge of that in the factory of recording, making sure they all worked at everybody's bench. I went around and did all that. Our floor in the factory was even painted with a static resistant paint that came in. The company was from Finland called Vaisla, which was a weather observation worldwide, supplying weather data and humidity and things like that.
Yeah,
So
bring it in, Steve.
shielding is the whole thing,
Well,
is
I
what you're
was
talking
told
about.
if some, I had a long conversation with a real expert on this, and he said, so the question was, if solar panels produce DC power, and then the problem becomes in the inversion to AC, why can't we just switch to DC appliances so that you never have to go to AC? And he said that DC requires very thick cables, and that there are other technical problems with DC appliances that mean that they can't work.
But
Is that true?
even DC has a field around it. You know, you have a polarity. Two cables, one's negative, one's positive. You're going to have that polarity on either side. So yeah, it's not alternating like AC, but you're still going to have some, you know,
Okay.
it's like a magnet. You can have a magnet to your head. I've got
Well, God
this
forbid.
here. There's like
Okay. All right. Thank you. We're at the top of the hour. We've been going 2 hours. We'll go another 20 minutes. This has been phenomenal. Thank you, Richard, Steve,
Hey, Sluggo,
Tim,
if it's okay with
Dana.
you, I'll call on the people waiting to ask
Well, yes,
questions.
Tatanka, Mary Beth, Nyla, Sarah, and Donna.
You got it.
So Harvey, and also Donna Gilmer has her
And yeah,
first.
I see Donna there. That's good.
Yep.
And Mary
Thanks,
Beth.
Milo.
But I just wanted to jump in and say that I've reported on this before, and you may have forgotten, but China's way ahead in developing electric vehicles with sodium ion batteries, and they have produced a very inexpensive electric car, BYD, CATL. And but Joe Biden was protecting the auto industry, the U.S. auto industry, and making it illegal to import those vehicles to the United States because
Right.
the U.S. auto industry just can't compete because they're so inexpensive and so well made. But they are affordable and they are not.
Yes.
So anyway, I just wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I didn't realize they had the sodium-based battery, but the BYD, I've seen them online, and they're, you can get basically the equivalent of a Corolla on an electric car from BYD for, 15 grand or less. And then, so that means that the American auto industry has no future. I mean, that car you're looking at here is, less than 20 grand. So the American auto industry basically is dead. We're never going to sell. Nobody in the world is going to buy an American car in 10 years because we can't compete, thanks to the geniuses in Detroit and in Washington. Okay, who was next? Mary Beth Brangan in Bolinas. Go ahead. And then we'll come back and we'll get to Tonka and Donna Gilmore and Sarah. Go ahead, Mary Beth.
Hi, Harvey. Thank you so much for doing this in-depth discussion. I remember talking to you about this, the issue of dirty electricity anyway, a long time ago. Remember, we started out. But I had my hand up to say that I talked to someone from London about what they do about lithium fires in cars, for instance. And what they do there, they have a huge truck that has a tank of water on it, and they pull the vehicle with a crane and submerge it completely into the tank of water, and that takes care of it.
Wow.
I mean, you can't use that for everything, of course, but it's an interesting approach, isn't it?
That is interesting. I think they do that to Tory politicians also, and that like makes a big difference. Okay.
I think the Tories do that to themselves.
Yeah, right. Donna Gilmore has not spoken, and Lynn, and then we'll go to Tatanka and Sarah again. Okay. And Jill, Donna, go
hi,
ahead.
it's Donna.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can see the Moss Landing fires from my house. So anyway, so I've done a deep dive on this and have a lot of information. Well, I guess I should probably write it all up.
Somebody
To
needs to
answer your
write this
question,
up.
you really, with these battery storage systems, the battery storage systems, you have to let the fires burn out. That's all they have right now. And there are numerous flaws and things that can.
Donna, you're breaking up a little bit. We'll try to get back to you, but we can't hear you.
Yeah, go ahead. Lynn hasn't spoken yet. Brian Roeder well, Sarah,
I
thank
got
you.
disconnected.
All right, go ahead real quick now. We're almost out of time, actually, but please, we want to hear from
Okay,
you.
yeah, I got disconnected.
We
We got a
got you.
power outage here with PG&E again.
Okay, stay safe, Donna.
So there.
Get a battery.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah,
go
we
ahead.
can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you
Okay.
hear us?
Yeah, there are numerous things. There are numerous problems with the batteries where they absolutely cannot detect all the problems that are going to start a fire, and that's the big myth that needs to be busted because everybody's hiding that piece of information on these batteries. So,
Well, we
and I have
operate.
some information on the sodium batteries and other type of.
Yeah, well, Donald, we've been in touch. We've been in touch over the years. You got Brian and Sarah. I don't know if you guys are in touch with each other, but this battery group in Moss Landing, you need to be in touch with Donna Gilmore. She's a great resource, very powerful and very smart. Go ahead, Sarah, please.
Hey, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, go
Yes.
ahead, please.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's an amazing program. I'm just so grateful to be here. And one thing I just wanted to share with your speaker, because we've had four or five building biologists. We can't fix the power line problem. It's not just dirty electricity. There's overloaded grid from all the electrification. And so we have 63 milligauss outside on one of the bedrooms here. And I can't be in the front of the house. It's dangerous for me. Just letting you know, and there's nothing I can do unless someone has a brilliant idea of how to deal with PG&E, because they say there's no law to make them accountable. They also do not flag houses that are fire hazardous with the Federal Pacific and Zinsco electric panels are, basically standard for 1950s homes in this area, and they are not compatible to cause a fire with neighbor solar through a transformer. We found that out when our appliances started shorting out, and we had such high magnetic fields, our meter wouldn't register. So, but I have discovered that if I go to a place like Danville, which, all new, $1 million homes, got new wiring, it's way better. Somehow there's a problem in a mix and match electric. I'm sensitive to this. So I could feel it if there's bad wiring, and somehow whatever you do to one house, you do to the rest on the street. So you're going to get tremendous dirty electricity or something with the wiring. And I spoke to Orrin Miller, and he said he has many clients, 20 other clients, who have Romex 1950s wiring. It becomes a giant EMF antenna when you have a neighbor with solar and goes, got to rewire. That's 20K. We don't have 20K. So I'm just saying you that there's other things. We also have a DE, dirty electricity filter, from Bill Bathgate, which is very good. I'm telling you, that one is great. It does the entire house. So it's beautiful. No magnetic fields, because one of the issues is you don't want to have magnetic fields from one of your filters, but it doesn't fix the power line problem. So if anyone has a direct line to anyone, public official, make PG&E accountable. They can't handle the grid. They're not canceling out their net current. We should not have 63 milligauss in front of our house, and the sidewalk is 1.1 milligauss.
Right.
So I'm just saying that these are, I'm just saying and we should have off grid, not just, the people don't have a choice, and they lose money because it's all selling back to the grid. And then they're having to sanction during hours. So, I mean, this is all needing to, if you've got public officials, they need to look at all of this.
Right.
Great report, Sarah. Great report.
Very good, Sarah. Thank you. I'm an opponent of the death penalty, but I make an exception for PG&E, let me tell you.
Harvey.
Yes, go ahead. Lynn Fireman, then Tatanka. We're almost out of time.
Yeah, my understanding is that, people were talking about putting, having trucks of water and putting cranes in the water. My understanding is that when they put water on those fires in Moss Landing, they got worse.
Right.
Yes, but that's not sad. That's not like drowning them.
Yeah, she's tough. Yeah, there are other speaker was talking about immersing a car. You can't do that with these huge battery installations, obviously not.
Yeah, but it
So that's,
probably doesn't work either with the car.
yeah, well, you're probably right, Lynn, but the UK seems to know how to do things better than we do in some cases. So, but your point's very well taken.
I think in the UK they dip them in tea. Okay,
That could be it, or just in fog.
right. Tatanka, and then
Yeah.
anybody else wants to jump in, raise your hand now. We got 11 minutes left. Go ahead, Tatanka.
Well, one statement, and then my question really was for Richard and Tim, but the statement is we have to consider Mother Earth and the air and the water and everything as part of infrastructure. Right now, it's an externality, and nature and humans pay the cost. That's, the nuclear power industry doesn't even have to think about our safety in case of an accident, et cetera. So I envision a world where when you build something, you have to take clean air, healthy soil, clean water, and the natural flow of energy that Mother Earth teaches. The question I had for Richard and Tim was, I'm a proponent of distributed solar energy and more decentralized. Are our present, quote, public utilities, which as we know are corporate capture, are they behemoths like the nuclear power industry itself? They just cry out for large solar arrays that then have to go tens and hundreds of miles of wiring and sacrifice efficiency, and they have to be supported. They can't hold a candle in terms of cost benefit and safety with distributed solar. So is the structure of the utility itself suspect? I mean, do we need to envision longer term solutions where we're looking for future generations? Do we do away with the old large infrastructure of a public utility as it presently exists?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that. Yes.
Yeah, please.
Okay, go ahead.
I think you put your finger right on the central issue. The technology of electric power has developed over the last 130 years. The utility industry doesn't want that because they have a business model that is making them a lot of money, and don't want to change. They don't like distributed energy. They don't like really. I think the whole electric AC power grid is basically obsolete, and you can except on a very small scale. A town or village can have its own little exchange of power between homes and buildings, but you don't need this big grid anymore. That was an artifact of J.P. Morgan and Thomas Edison
and George Westinghouse.
Yeah, well, he played a role.
Yeah,
mainly at one point, J.P. Morgan owned about a third of all the electric power in the United States back in the 20s.
Right. Well, but the point also is that if we're going to go to distributed generation, we got to make sure that we don't lay technological traps that we didn't count on. So, if they're putting solar panels on rooftops, which is, the brass ring here, they can't have many converters in them.
Yeah, you have to have the right equipment. And you
exactly right, and so
it works.
I was in the solar industry during the Carter years, and then later, about a decade or so ago, we always went in and did an energy efficient audit. And you can reduce the need for so much by insulating your home. And we know now that you can, I mean, the thought of LA rebuilding with the exact same technology when in earthquake country, you as part of your basement, you can have the home rest on a curved facility and it moves. So the earthquake doesn't affect it all the way through to cement that doesn't emit. I mean, the world's going to continue building cement. It's a huge trillions industry, but it emits methane. And there are ways of creating cement that don't. And there are ways of creating Adobe tile that we could rebuild. When we rebuild LA, we have to rebuild it differently. They're reporting 200-mile-an-hour winds last week, where we were traveling just, close to Atlanta, where you're having fires here and you're having floods right in the same state, a couple hundred miles apart. and the winds are over 200 miles an hour. So this is, as we know, the temperature of the earth is rising, and the oil companies knew in the late 70s that they were responsible, and they went another way. You know, they created climate denial, and they bought a political
Tatanka,
party.
I
Yeah.
hate to stop you when you're on a roll and everything you're saying is right on target, but
Go ahead, stop me.
our friend Lobo wants to say something.
hi,
I don't
Okay,
Lobo.
and
think he's
listen,
spoken yet.
some of you might have found this a little eye-rolling, a little technical, but we actually made a huge breakthrough here, that putting the people from Moss Landing in touch with Joe Mangano. And you guys, we really need to get this publicized. They can't be building these facilities. And Mila put up, you know, there is an alternative battery to lithium. We can't have these lithium cars driving all over the place. It's such a signature of Elon Musk. He does something that seems to be good, electric cars, and yet these lithium cars are not safe.
Hey, Sluggo, we're trying to get Lobo in real
Yeah,
quick.
Lobo, and then Betty, and then I think we're done.
You had a story. He was here right at the opening of the meeting,
That's
and
right.
been
Go ahead, Lobo.
There you
Give
go.
us a howl, will you?
Oh, thanks. I actually unmuted accidentally, but I just want to say that one of our really key Esalen tribe of Monterey County people, Pam Tanis, has been very, very sick, and she's still in convalescent care from living in Marina and getting sick from this. Thanks.
Well, we send her our best, and we hope that these illnesses will not be in vain. That we can warn the rest of the world that this can't happen again. This can't happen again. We can't have a lithium fire like this. So there will be thousands and thousands and thousands of installations all over the world now, and this has to be a warning, an early warning. So
And
thank you, Matt.
Sluggo, we definitely can have self-driving lithium batteries driving into people's living rooms and bursting into fire.
Yeah, really sickening. Oh, we're almost done, folks. Betty, and then Melissa, and then Mimi. Go ahead, Betty.
Okay. I want to go back to what Tatanka was saying before about Mother Earth and the whole Earth community, and also refer back to what Madeline mentioned before, the precautionary principle. And I think that is a huge step towards taking the whole Earth community into consideration. And I can't really. Do people know what that means? The precautionary principle? Yeah, because I know that the EU.
Tell us, give us a one sentence definition, because you know what you're talking about, and then we'll move ahead.
Well, I'm not a scientist, but the idea of that the producer of chemicals and et cetera has to prove that it's safe, not that victims
Absolutely
have to prove that it's harmful.
Beautiful.
And the precautionary principle was completely ignored with nuclear power, and so we cannot have
many
that.
other things.
And just about everything, unfortunately.
Yes, we cannot have that happen with renewable technologies. And there
Betty, will you come back next week and we can discuss this more, because we're right up against the deadline?
Sure,
but we'd
I'll
love
try
to get.
to.
Thank you,
Melissa, and then maybe.
Can I just say one sentence? Look at the Earth Charter for many things, but it does mention one of the things that is a precautionary principle that's necessary. Earthcharter.org.
Beautiful.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Melissa, Mimi, and then we're done.
Hey, this is me. Anyway, thanks for having me. And I just have a question. I have to use a power chair. Should power chairs also switch to ion batteries and all of our equipment? Do we do away with lithium and switch to ion? And is ion?
That's a brilliant question, Melissa. Quick answers. Timothy, Tatanka, anybody? I would say yes, but you know.
But is ion more expensive, or is ion cheaper than lithium?
Yeah.
Let's ask it again next week, okay?
Yeah, Melissa, stay with us, because that's a great
week.
question, and I'm sorry we don't have a quick answer right now.
Hopefully next week we'll have an answer.
I want to thank all the speakers, including Melissa and Mimi, for speaking, and Tim and
Tim, yes, and Jill and
Richard
Brian Sarah,
And Mimi's ready to
Madeline,
go. So let's hear from Mimi and then we can wrap
thank
up.
you.
Mimi?
Oh, thanks.
You're breaking up. You're
I just
breaking
wanted
up
to
pretty
let you all
bad.
know that. Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to let everyone know there is a lawsuit over Moss Landing, and PG is also is being as well, since we
Beautiful.
dislike PG so much. Thank you.
Well, come back.
Can't stand PG.
Yeah, Sarah, Brian, all you guys from Moss Landing, if you'll come back, give us an update next week or periodically. We don't want to lose track of this. This is a huge deal. And Jill, great to have you with us. Everybody, I guess we're at 4:20. Time for everybody. Madeline, thank you for coming with us. Time to go toke up. But let's definitely follow through on these technical discussions. I can't believe it's been 2.5 hours. Okay, you guys, we'll see you next week. Thank you,
Sluggo,
Steve.
real quick, if I could just summarize. Nuclear power, unsafe at any wattage. Lithium batteries, we need to decommission them and move on to safer sources of energy storage. And solar panels need to be improved, but that seems to be the way to go.
Yes, indeed. And the inverter was the word I was looking. I think we need to invert a lot of our values, especially in the age of Trump. No nukes, everybody. We'll see you next week.
No nukes.
No
Safe
tongues
solar.
for you.
Thanks, everybody.